What would you do if you had only $15 left to your name, and a stranger's life depended on it? Imagine being 80 years old, alone, and barely scraping by, your every penny a lifeline for survival. That's where our story begins, with a man whose simple act of kindness sparked a chain of events that would transform his life and inspire millions. Meet Walter Grayson, a retired electrician whose weathered hands and tired eyes tell a tale of a life once full of hope, now reduced to a tiny room above a dusty barbershop in a small town. Walter's wife, Eleanor, passed away 4 years ago, leaving him with nothing but a faded photo album and a heart heavy with memories. Every Wednesday, Walter shuffles 3 miles to Sally's Cafe, where he orders the cheapest item on the menu, a cup of black coffee and a single biscuit. The waitress, Clara, knows Walter's struggles all too well. She often slips an extra biscuit onto his plate, though Walter's pride keeps him from accepting outright charity. Just the usual, Clara, Walter murmurs as he eases into his favorite booth by the window, his shaky fingers counting out coins from a tattered wallet. But this Wednesday is different. Walter had just left the pharmacy, where he learned his blood pressure medication had spiked in price. With only $18 to his name, he faces a heart-wrenching choice: buy the medicine he desperately needs or survive the week until his next pension check arrives. He stuffs his last $15 bill into his pocket, deciding to wait, his chest already tightening with every step. As Walter sips his coffee, the bitter taste grounding him in his reality, the cafe door creaks open, and in walks a young soldier, his uniform crisp but his face etched with exhaustion. Now, put yourself in Walter's shoes. You're struggling to survive, your health on the line, when you see this soldier, Private Ethan Carter, who's clearly in need. He's just returned from his 3rd tour overseas, his car broken down on the highway, and he's penniless after losing his wallet. What would you do? Would you keep your $15, knowing it's your only buffer, or give it to the soldier, risking your own survival to help a stranger? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you'd choose. And if you're moved by stories of kindness and courage, hit that like button and subscribe to Daily Narrated Stories for more heartwarming tales that remind us of the power of humanity. Private Ethan Carter had been walking for hours under the scorching sun, his boots heavy with dust, his stomach growling after days of meager rations. The heat shimmered off the asphalt, and sweat stung his eyes as he trudged along the empty highway, his military pack digging into his shoulders. Ethan's mind drifted to his sister, Lily, who lived in the next town over. She'd been struggling since their mother passed last year, and he'd promised to be there for her birthday, a promise that now felt like a distant dream. His car had broken down 7 miles back, the engine coughing its last breath, and when he'd reached for his wallet to call for help, it was gone, likely dropped in the dirt while he'd checked under the hood. "I'm so sorry," Ethan stammered to Clara, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I must have dropped my wallet while checking the engine. I can sweep the floors or wash dishes to pay for a meal." Clara hesitated. Sally's Cafe owner, Tom, had a strict no freebies policy, even for soldiers. "Don't worry about it, kid," Tom called from the kitchen, his tone gruff but softened by a hint of kindness. "Just this once." But before Ethan could nod his thanks, Walter rose from his booth, his cane tapping softly against the worn linoleum floor. The cafe fell silent, the clatter of dishes and hum of conversation fading as the old man shuffled to the counter, his thin frame trembling with the effort. The air seemed to thicken with anticipation. Every pair of eyes followed Walter, sensing something profound was about to unfold. Without a word, he placed his last $15 bill next to Ethan's plate, the crumpled bill a stark contrast to the soldier's crisp uniform. "Sir, I can't take this," Ethan protested, his eyes widening at Walter's threadbare coat and scuffed shoes, the soles worn thin from years of walking. "You need it more than I do." Walter's voice was steady, though it cracked with emotion, a tremor of memory in his words. "My boy, Tommy, was a soldier too. He never made it back. He'd want me to do this." Walter's mind flashed back to a crisp autumn day 20 years ago, when Tommy was just 19, home on leave before his first deployment. They'd been fishing at Lake Harrow, the water glinting like a mirror under the golden sun. Tommy had reeled in a small trout, his laughter echoing across the lake. But then he'd spotted a young boy on the shore, shivering in a thin jacket, his fishing line tangled. Without a second thought, Tommy had waded over, untangled the line, and given the boy his own jacket. "It's the little things, Dad," Tommy had said, his breath visible in the chilly air, his smile as warm as the sun. "They mean the most." That memory flooded Walter's heart now, warming him despite the ache in his chest. He looked at Ethan and saw Tommy's same earnest eyes, the same quiet strength, and knew he'd made the right choice. Clara's eyes brimmed with tears. She knew that $15 was all Walter had left. She'd seen him count out those coins every Wednesday, his pride a shield against the pity he couldn't bear. "At least let me repay you," Ethan insisted, scribbling his name on a napkin, his handwriting shaky with gratitude. "I'll send you the money as soon as I can." Walter shook his head, a faint smile on his lips that didn't reach his tired eyes, the lines on his face deepening with the weight of his sacrifice. "All I need is to know you'll get home safe to your family." As Walter turned to leave, Clara called after him, her voice breaking. "Your breakfast, Walter?" But he waved her off, his voice barely above a whisper, the words heavy with resignation. "Not so hungry today." The door jingled as he stepped into the chilly morning air, pulling his coat tighter against the wind, the cold biting at his exposed skin. He didn't know someone in the corner booth had witnessed the entire exchange, a stranger whose actions would soon change everything. The walk back to his room felt endless, each step a battle against the growing pain in his chest, a sharp reminder of the medication he couldn't afford. The wind howled through the empty streets, carrying the scent of rain, and a cold drizzle began to fall, soaking through his thin jacket, chilling him to the bone. Walter's thoughts spiraled as he walked. Memories of Eleanor danced in his mind, her laughter a melody he hadn't heard in years. He remembered the day they'd opened their small electrical repair shop together, her hands steady as she handed him tools, her smile brighter than the shop's neon sign. But the economic crash 12 years ago had taken it all. The shop, their savings, their dreams. And then Eleanor's illness had taken her, leaving Walter with nothing but a hollow ache that never faded. Now, with his health failing and his last $15 gone, he wondered if he'd made the right choice. Had he been foolish to give away his only lifeline? By the time he reached the barber shop, Walter was drenched and gasping for air, his breaths coming in shallow, ragged bursts, each one a struggle against the tightening in his chest. His landlady, Mrs. Harper, stood at the foot of the stairs, her expression a mix of sympathy and resolve, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Mr. Grayson, I've held off as long as I can," she said, handing him an envelope, her voice trembling slightly, her hands wringing together nervously. "The owner needs the back rent by Friday, or I'll have no choice." She couldn't finish the sentence, but Walter understood. The eviction notice felt like a lead weight in his hand, its words blurring as his vision swam, the black ink smudging under the raindrops on his fingers. "I'll figure it out," he said, his voice hollow, though he had no idea how, the weight of his situation pressing down on him like a physical burden. Upstairs, Walter's room was freezing. The heat had been cut off 2 weeks ago when he couldn't pay the bill. The air smelled of damp wood and mildew, and the single bulb overhead flickered weakly as he flipped the switch, casting long shadows across the peeling wallpaper. He changed into dry clothes, his fingers fumbling with the buttons, the cold making them stiff and clumsy, the fabric rough against his skin. Sitting on his creaky bed, he stared at the faded photograph of Eleanor on the nightstand, her smile a beacon in the dim light, her eyes seeming to look right into his soul. "What would you tell me to do now, my love?" he whispered, his voice breaking, a single tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek. He could almost hear her reply, her voice soft but firm. "You did the right thing, Walt. You always do." But the comfort of her imagined words couldn't ease the pain in his chest, which grew sharper with every heartbeat, a relentless reminder of his fragility. Walter's gaze drifted to the small wooden box on his dresser, where he kept Eleanor's old recipe cards, her handwriting a delicate cursive that still smelled faintly of vanilla, a scent that brought a flood of memories. He opened the box, pulling out her recipe for apple pie, the edges yellowed with age, the paper soft under his fingers. The memory of her baking on Sunday mornings filled his senses, the warmth of the oven, the sweet aroma of cinnamon, the sound of her humming as she rolled out the dough, her apron dusted with flour. But now, The room was silent, the air cold, and the pie a distant dream. Walter's heart ached with a longing so deep it felt like a physical wound, a void that nothing could fill. He'd given away his last $15, but at what cost? He hadn't eaten a proper meal in days, and the medicine he needed was still out of reach. Doubt crept in, whispering that he'd been foolish, that he'd sacrificed too much. But then he thought of Tommy, of the soldier in the cafe, and the doubt quieted, replaced by a quiet resolve, a flicker of pride in his decision. That night, Walter's condition worsened. His breathing grew shallow, each inhale a struggle, and the pain in his chest became a vice, squeezing tighter with every heartbeat, a searing fire that spread through his body. He knew he should go to the hospital, but the thought of the bills kept him rooted to his bed, the thin blanket doing little to ward off the chill, its rough texture scratching against his skin. He clutched Eleanor's photograph to his chest, the glass frame cold against his skin, and closed his eyes, hoping to ride out the pain until morning, his breath slowing to a faint rhythm. Outside, the drizzle turned into a full-blown storm, the wind howling like a mournful song, rattling the window panes as if the world itself were grieving, the rain hammering against the glass in a relentless rhythm. Meanwhile, back at Sally's cafe, Ethan couldn't shake the image of the old man who'd given him everything. He sat at the counter, his meal finished, but his appetite gone, the $15 bill still burning a hole in his conscience. He thought of his own father, who'd passed when Ethan was just a boy, and how he'd always taught him to honor kindness with action. That man who paid for me, who is he? Where does he live? Ethan asked Clara, his voice low but urgent, his hands clenched into fists on the counter. Clara hesitated, her loyalty to Walter's privacy warring with Ethan's earnest plea, her fingers twisting the corner of her apron nervously. Walter's a proud man. He wouldn't want pity, she said, her voice soft, her eyes darting to the door as if expecting Walter to walk back in. I'm not here to pity him, Ethan replied, his voice firm, his gaze steady. What he did today, it wasn't small. Please. Clara bit her lip, her mind racing, her heart torn between loyalty and the hope that Ethan could help. She'd known Walter for years, had seen him at his lowest, but she'd also seen the way he lit up when he spoke of Tommy. She remembered a day last year when Walter had come in with a small medal Tommy had earned in basic training, his eyes shining with pride as he showed it to her, his hands trembling as he held the tiny piece of metal. He was my hero, Walter had said, his voice thick with emotion, a rare smile breaking through his usual stoicism. Now, Clara wondered if she was betraying that trust by sharing his address. But Ethan's sincerity moved her, and she couldn't ignore the feeling that this soldier might be Walter's lifeline. After a long pause, she relented, her voice barely above a whisper. He lives above the barbershop on Elm Street. But don't expect a warm welcome. As Ethan thanked her and left, Clara watched him go, a knot of worry tightening in her stomach, her hands trembling as she wiped down the counter. Had she done the right thing? Or had she just set Walter up for more heartache? The next morning, Walter awoke to frantic knocking, the sound jarring in the stillness of his room, pulling him from a restless sleep filled with dreams of Eleanor and Tommy. Disoriented and weak, he dragged himself to the door, his slippers scuffing against the floorboards, each step a monumental effort. He opened it to find Mrs. Harper, her face pale with panic, her hair disheveled from the storm, her eyes wide with fear. Mr. Grayson, your water pipe burst. It's flooding the barbershop downstairs. The owner's furious. Walter followed her down, his heart sinking as he saw the ankle-deep water pouring from the ceiling, the barbershop's equipment, clippers, chairs, mirrors, ruined by the deluge. The air smelled of wet plaster and rust, and the sound of dripping water echoed like a ticking clock, a relentless reminder of his mounting troubles. The owner, Mr. Singh, was livid, his voice rising over the chaos, his hands gesturing wildly as he surveyed the damage. This will cost thousands to fix, he shouted, his eyes flashing with anger. If you can't pay, I'll have to sue. Walter stood in stunned silence, the water seeping into his slippers, the cold numbing his toes, his heart pounding in his chest. I'll sell what I have, he offered weakly, his voice barely audible over the sound of the water, his hands trembling at his sides. But he knew his few possessions, a cracked radio, a worn Bible, A handful of Tommy's old letters wouldn't cover a fraction of the damage. Mr. Singh shook his head, his anger unyielding, his face a mask of frustration. That won't be enough, and you know it. I'm calling my lawyer. The words hit Walter like a physical blow, each syllable a nail in the coffin of his dwindling hope. This was it, the final blow. Everything he'd worked for, every shred of dignity and independence, was dissolving before his eyes, washed away by the flood, leaving him with nothing but the weight of his failures. As Walter turned to climb the stairs, a sharp pain seized his chest, so intense it stole his breath, a searing fire that radiated through his body. He gripped the railing, the room spinning as his vision blurred, the edges darkening like a vignette, the sound of the water fading to a distant hum. Mrs. Harper rushed to his side, her hands hovering uncertainly, her voice trembling with fear. "Mr. Grayson, you need a doctor." But Walter waved her off, his pride a stubborn shield even now, his voice a strained whisper. "Just need to rest," he mumbled, though they both knew it was far worse. Each step up the stairs felt like climbing a mountain, his legs trembling, his heart pounding erratically, the pain a constant companion. Back in his room, Walter sat at his small table, the chill of the air biting at his skin, the storm outside a relentless roar, the rain a steady drumbeat against the window. He pulled out a piece of paper and began to write 2 letters. The first was to his estranged son, Daniel, in Oregon, whom he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. "I'm sorry I wasn't the father you needed," he wrote, his hand shaking, the ink smudging where a tear fell, his heart heavy with regret. The second was to Mr. Singh, apologizing for the damage, his words a quiet plea for understanding, a final act of humility. He placed the letters in envelopes, along with his wedding ring and Eleanor's silver brooch, the only items of value he had left, their weight a bittersweet reminder of the life he'd once had. As Walter sealed the envelopes, he pulled out an old letter from Tommy, written just weeks before his death. The paper creased and faded from years of handling. "Dad," it read, "I helped a kid in the village today, gave him my last ration bar. He smiled like I'd given him the world. It's the little things that matter most out here." Walter's eyes welled with tears as he read the words aloud, his voice trembling in the empty room, the sound swallowed by the storm outside. The memory of Tommy's selflessness fueled Walter's resolve. He'd done the right thing, even if it cost him everything. But the weight of his decision pressed down on him, a heavy burden he could no longer carry. He thought of Daniel, of the years they'd lost to pride and misunderstanding. The last time they'd spoken, Daniel had been 25, his voice cold over the phone. "You were never there, Dad. Not for me, not for Mom." Walter had wanted to explain, to tell him about the long hours at the shop, the bills that never stopped coming, but the line had gone dead, and the silence had stretched into years. Now, with his life hanging by a thread, Walter wished he could take it all back, wished he could hold his son one more time. That night, the pain in Walter's chest became unbearable, a searing fire that spread through his body, each heartbeat a struggle. With no phone to call for help, he lay on his bed, clutching Eleanor's photograph to his heart, the glass frame cold against his skin, the storm outside raging with a ferocity that mirrored his inner turmoil. The rain hammered against the window like a drumbeat to his fading pulse, the wind howling as if mourning the life he'd lived. "Maybe it's time to join you, Ellie," he whispered, his eyes growing heavy, his breath slowing to a faint rhythm, the world fading to a soft blur. But fate had other plans. At that very moment, a military jeep screeched to a halt outside the barber shop, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a beacon, the sound of its engine a faint hope in the chaos of the storm. Earlier that day, Ethan had been at the base, rallying his squad mates, Corporals Lopez and Bennett, in a small, dimly lit room that smelled of coffee and gun oil. "This man gave me his last dollar," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion, his hands clenched into fists, his eyes burning with determination. "We can't let him down." The soldiers nodded, their faces set with resolve as they loaded supplies into the jeep, blankets, canned food, a first aid kit, the storm clouds gathering ominously overhead, their shadows stretching across the pavement. Lopez checked his watch, his brow furrowing, his voice tense. "We've got to move fast. That storm's getting worse." Bennett nodded, slinging a medical bag over his shoulder, his expression grim. "If he's as bad off as you say, we might not have much time." The urgency in their movements was palpable, the air charged with the weight of their mission, the question hanging unspoken. Would they reach Walter in time? The pounding on Walter's door jolted him awake, the sound a lifeline in the haze of his pain, pulling him back from the edge of darkness. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming. The noise was too forceful to be Mrs. Harper, too urgent to be a neighbor. With every ounce of strength, he shuffled to the door, his slippers dragging against the floor, his body trembling with the effort, and opened it to find Ethan, drenched from the rain, with 2 soldiers behind him. "Mr. Grayson, thank God you're here," Ethan said, relief flooding his face, his uniform soaked through, water dripping onto the floor, his breath visible in the cold air. "Are you okay? You don't look well." Walter swayed, gripping the doorframe, his vision swimming, the room tilting around him. "What are you doing here, son?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm. "May we come in?" Ethan asked, already stepping forward to steady the older man, his arms strong and sure, his touch a grounding force. Inside, Walter's sparse room told a story of hardship his pride would never voice. Empty pill bottles scattered on the counter, a stack of unpaid bills tied with a rubber band, a single can of soup on the shelf, its label peeling, the metal dented from age. The soldiers exchanged glances, their resolve hardening as they took in the stark reality of Walter's life, the air heavy with the scent of dampness and despair. "Sir, after what you did for me yesterday, I couldn't walk away," Ethan explained, his voice steady but laced with emotion, his eyes searching Walter's face for a sign of hope. "I tried to come earlier, but I got called to base for a briefing. These are my squad mates, Corporals Lopez and Bennett." Walter shook his head weakly, his voice a whisper, his hands trembling at his sides. "It was nothing. Nothing," Ethan challenged gently, his eyes softening, his voice warm with gratitude. "Sir, you gave me your last dollar when you needed it more. That's not nothing." Corporal Lopez stepped forward, his boots leaving wet prints on the floor, his expression serious but kind. "Ethan told us what happened. We brought supplies, and our medic is on his way." Before Walter could protest, a 4th soldier entered with a medical bag, his face serious as he knelt beside Walter, his movements swift and precise. He checked Walter's vitals, his fingers deft as he pressed a stethoscope to Walter's chest, the cold metal a shock against his skin, his expression growing grave. Blood pressures through the roof, pulse erratic. The medic reported, his voice clipped, his brow furrowed with concern. "Sir, when did you last take your medication?" Walter looked away, shame coloring his cheeks, his voice barely a whisper. "Ran out last week. We need to get him to a hospital," the medic said, his tone leaving no room for argument, his hands already packing up his equipment. "No hospitals," Walter protested, his voice weak but stubborn, his pride a final barrier. "Can't afford it." Ethan knelt beside him, his hand resting gently on Walter's arm, his touch a quiet reassurance. "Sir, I made some calls. The Veterans Relief Network has a program for families of fallen soldiers. Your son's service qualifies you for benefits you've never claimed." Walter stared at him, disbelief etched into his weathered face, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, the weight of years of struggle lifting slightly. "That can't be right. No one ever told me," he whispered, his voice breaking, his hands trembling in his lap. "The system fails too many people," Ethan said, his voice firm, his jaw set with determination, his eyes burning with a quiet fire. "But we're fixing this now. You need medical attention." Despite Walter's protests, the soldiers helped him to their jeep, their movements careful but urgent, their hands steady as they supported him down the stairs. As they descended, Mr. Singh emerged from the barbershop, his face dark with anger, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his hands still wet from trying to mop up the flood. "Grayson, we need to talk about this damage. Now," he shouted, his voice cutting through the storm, his eyes flashing with frustration. Ethan stepped between them, his posture protective, his voice calm but firm. "Sir, this man needs a hospital. Whatever the issue is, it can wait." Mr. Singh scoffed, his voice rising over the sound of the rain, his hands gesturing wildly. "Do you know how much this will cost?" "He has nothing." Corporal Bennett stepped forward, his phone already in hand, his expression calm but resolute. "What's the estimated damage?" "At least $10,000. Mr. Singh snapped, his eyes narrowing, his anger a palpable force. Bennett nodded, his voice steady, his demeanor unshaken. "I'm with a veterans community group. We help people like Mr. Grayson. Give me your contact info. We'll have a team here tomorrow to start repairs." Mr. Singh's anger faltered, replaced by confusion, his shoulders slumping slightly, his voice softening. "Why would you do that for him?" "Because that's what we do," Lopez interjected, his voice steady, his eyes meeting Mr. Singh's with quiet conviction. "We take care of our own, especially those who've sacrificed for others." A small crowd had gathered outside, their umbrellas bobbing in the rain, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern, the storm a dramatic backdrop to the unfolding scene. Clara from the cafe was among them, her apron still tied around her waist, her eyes wide with worry, the rain streaking down her face like tears. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked, her voice trembling, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "He will be," Ethan assured her, his tone firm but kind, his eyes softening as he met her gaze. "But he needs more than medical help." Clara nodded, determination replacing her fear, her hands clenching into fists at her sides, her resolve a quiet strength. "Tell me what to do," she said, her voice steady despite the storm. As the jeep pulled away, Walter glanced back at his tiny room, the place he'd feared losing, yet had become his cage, its silhouette fading into the rain. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of something he'd forgotten. Hope, a fragile light in the darkness of his despair. At the hospital, doctors confirmed the medic's fears. Walter had been moments from a fatal heart attack, his heart a ticking time bomb that had nearly run out of time. They started treatment immediately, hooking him up to monitors that beeped steadily, their rhythm a stark contrast to the chaos of the past 24 hours. The sterile scent of antiseptic a sharp contrast to the damp mildew of his room. The doctor, a kind-eyed woman with graying hair, explained that without intervention, Walter wouldn't have survived the night, her voice gentle but firm, her hands steady as she adjusted his fore. "You're lucky those soldiers got to you when they did," she said, her eyes meeting his with a quiet compassion. Walter nodded, his throat tight with emotion, the hospital bed a strange comfort after years of hardship, the warmth of the blanket a luxury he hadn't felt in months. While Walter rested, Ethan made a series of calls from the waiting room, his fingers tapping anxiously on the armrest, his mind racing with the weight of his mission. The first was to the Veterans Affairs office, demanding expedited benefits for Walter, his voice rising with urgency as he explained the situation, his words a plea for justice. The second was to his commanding officer, explaining the situation, his words measured but passionate, his determination unwavering. The third call would prove the most significant of all, a call that would set in motion a chain of events beyond his wildest dreams. Hours later, as Walter lay in his hospital bed, the fore dripping steadily into his arm, the soft hum of the machines a soothing backdrop, Ethan entered with a tablet, his expression a mix of excitement and nervousness, his hands trembling slightly as he held the device. "Someone wants to talk to you," he said, turning the screen toward Walter, his voice soft but eager. On it was a man in his 40s, his eyes, so much like Walter's, brimming with tears, his face a mirror of the past. "Dad?" His voice cracked, the sound echoing in the sterile room, a single word that carried the weight of years. "Is it really you?" Walter's hands shook as he took the tablet, his heart racing for a different reason now, a surge of emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "Daniel? How did you?" He whispered, his voice breaking, his eyes locked on the screen. "Your soldier friend tracked me down through Mom's old knitting club directory," Daniel said, wiping his eyes, his voice thick with emotion, his hands trembling as he held the phone. "Dad, why didn't you tell me things were this bad?" Walter couldn't speak, overwhelmed by seeing his son after so many years, the years of silence melting away in an instant, the pain of their estrangement a distant memory. "I'm flying in tomorrow," Daniel said firmly, his jaw set with determination, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "We've got a lot to make up for." Daniel's voice softened, a note of regret creeping in, his words a balm to Walter's wounded heart. "I should have reached out sooner, Dad. I was so angry after Mom died. I blamed you for not being there." But I see now how much you were hurting too. I'm so sorry." Walter's tears fell freely, the weight of years of regret lifting with every word, the pain of the past giving way to a fragile hope. He thought of the last time he'd seen Daniel, at Eleanor's funeral, the air heavy with grief and unspoken words, the scent of lilies overwhelming in the small church. Daniel had walked away without a backward glance, and Walter had let him, too broken to chase after him, his heart shattered by loss. Now, seeing his son's face, hearing his voice, Walter felt a piece of his heart mend, the pain of the past giving way to a new beginning, a chance to rebuild what had been lost. 3 days later, Walter was released from the hospital with new medications and a strict care plan, his steps steadier, his breathing easier, the color returning to his cheeks. When Ethan arrived to drive him home, Walter was stunned to see not just Daniel waiting, but a convoy of 4 military vehicles, their engines humming in the hospital parking lot, their presence a testament to the impact of his small act. "What's all this?" Walter asked, bewildered, his eyes wide as he took in the scene, the sunlight glinting off the vehicle's polished surfaces. Ethan grinned, his smile bright despite the lingering rain, his eyes shining with pride. "Just a few friends who wanted to help," he said, his voice warm with camaraderie. As they drove, Walter noticed they weren't heading toward the barbershop. Instead, they turned onto Pine Avenue, the nicer part of town with tree-lined streets and cozy homes, the air smelling of fresh grass and blooming flowers, a stark contrast to the damp streets he'd left behind. "There's been a change of plans," Daniel said, squeezing his father's hand, his grip warm and reassuring, his smile a promise of better days. "You're staying with me until we find a permanent solution." They pulled up to a quaint rental house, its porch adorned with flower boxes, the windows glowing with soft light, the scent of lavender drifting from the garden. "You rented a place here?" Walter asked, his voice tinged with disbelief, his eyes taking in the charming details, the white picket fence, the rocking chair on the porch. "I thought you lived in Oregon." "I did." Daniel smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners, his voice soft with affection. "I've taken a leave from work, Dad. We've got 15 years to catch up on. I'm not rushing that." But the real surprise came when Walter stepped inside, the warmth of the house enveloping him like a hug. The living room was packed with people. Clara from the cafe, Mrs. Harper, several soldiers, and a tall man with stars on his shoulders, his presence commanding the room, his uniform a symbol of honor. "Mr. Grayson," the man said, extending his hand, his voice deep and resonant, his eyes warm with respect. "I'm General William Hayes. It's an honor to meet you." Walter stood speechless, his heart pounding, as the general continued, his words carrying the weight of years of service, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Private Carter brought your story to my attention. Your son, Sergeant Tommy Grayson, served under my command in his final mission. He saved my life and the lives of 14 others during an ambush that took him from us. His actions were never properly recognized due to the mission's classified nature." The general opened a small box, revealing a bronze star, its surface gleaming in the light, a symbol of sacrifice and bravery. "This belongs to your family. Sergeant Grayson was posthumously awarded this medal, but the notification never reached you." Walter accepted the medal, tears streaming down his face, the medal cold against his palm, but warm with meaning, a tangible connection to his son's legacy. "There's more," Ethan said, stepping forward, his voice steady, his eyes bright with hope. "Your son's sacrifice entitled you to benefits and a pension you've never received. The paperwork's been expedited. You'll get back payments for the last 8 years." "Dad," Daniel interjected, his voice soft but firm, his hand resting on Walter's shoulder. "It's over $350,000. Your financial worries are over." Walter's knees buckled as he tried to process the news, the room spinning around him, the voices of the crowd a distant hum, the weight of years of struggle lifting in an instant. But the surprises kept coming. Clara stepped forward with Tom from the cafe, her smile wide but her eyes misty, her hands clasped in front of her. "The town council met yesterday," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, her eyes shining with pride. "After hearing what you did for Private Carter, they wanted to be here. I'm Mayor Linda Brooks," a woman in a suit added, her tone warm but official, her smile genuine. Your generosity inspired our community. We've created the Tommy Grayson Memorial Fund to support veterans and elderly residents in need. And the first recipient is a certain barbershop that needs repairs after water damage." Mr. Singh, who'd been standing quietly in the back, approached Walter, his expression softened, his hands clasped in front of him, his voice low but sincere. "I misjudged you, Mr. Grayson. I'm deeply sorry," he said, his eyes meeting Walter's with a newfound respect. As Walter shook his hand, the weight of the past few days seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of forgiveness and understanding, a bridge rebuilt between them. Corporal Lopez called for attention, his voice cutting through the chatter, his presence a steady anchor. "There's someone else who wants to speak," he said, his tone a mix of excitement and reverence. A TV screen flickered on, showing a national news broadcast, the anchor's voice crisp and professional, the screen a window to the world beyond. An extraordinary story of sacrifice that's captured the nation. "We go live to Private Ethan Carter." A reporter thrust a microphone toward Ethan, who stood beside Walter, his posture straight, but his eyes bright with emotion, his voice steady as he spoke. "Your social media post about Mr. Grayson has been shared over 3 million times in 72 hours. Why do you think it resonated?" Ethan looked into the camera, his voice steady, his words a testament to the power of kindness. "In a world full of bad news, Mr. Grayson showed us what true sacrifice looks like. He gave his last dollar to a stranger when he had nothing left. That's the America I fight for." Earlier, as Walter was being driven to the hospital, Ethan had whispered to Clara, "I've got something big in the works online, stay tuned." His voice a quiet promise, his eyes alight with determination. Now, the reporter turned to Walter, her expression a mix of awe and curiosity, her voice soft but probing. "Your story has moved millions. People from all 50 states have donated to the GoFundMe Private Carter started, raising over $1.5 million in 3 days. What do you want to say to them?" Walter's voice was soft but clear, his words carrying the weight of a lifetime, his hands trembling as he clutched the bronze star. "I don't deserve this. I just did what my boy would have done, what any decent person would do. If you want to honor something, honor Tommy's memory and all those who serve," he said, his voice breaking, his eyes glistening with tears. General Hayes stepped forward, his presence a steady anchor in the whirlwind of emotion, his voice a quiet command. "And that's what we'll do, sir. The president has invited you to the White House next month for a ceremony honoring you and your son's legacy," he said, his words a promise of recognition, a tribute to a life of sacrifice. 6 months later, the town gathered for the grand opening of the Tommy Grayson Veteran Support Center, the air filled with the scent of fresh paint and the sound of laughter. What had once been a dilapidated warehouse was now a state-of-the-art facility offering healthcare, job training, and housing assistance to veterans and elderly residents. Its walls a testament to the power of community. Walter, looking healthier than he had in years, his cheeks flushed with color, his steps steady, stood beside Daniel as he cut the ribbon, the crowd erupting in applause, their cheers a symphony of gratitude, their faces alight with hope. Walter stepped up to the microphone, his voice steady and strong, a far cry from the frail whisper of 6 months ago, his hand steady as he held the bronze star. "When I gave that $15 to a young soldier, I never expected anything in return," he began, his words resonating across the hushed crowd, the sun casting a warm glow over the gathering. "I was just doing what Eleanor would have wanted, what Tommy would have done. These past months taught me something profound. The smallest acts of kindness can create the biggest waves. This center isn't about me. It's about all of us remembering we're responsible for each other. No veteran should ever feel forgotten. No elderly person should have to choose between medicine and a meal. And no act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever wasted." Private Ethan Carter, now promoted to corporal, stood at attention nearby, pride radiating from his face, his uniform a symbol of the honor he'd fought for. Walter continued, his voice steady but filled with emotion, his words a reflection of a life transformed. "Tommy once wrote to me from the battlefield, saying courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being scared but doing the right thing anyway. That day in the cafe, I wasn't brave. I was just a lonely old man who remembered what matters most." As he spoke, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the crowd, the light a symbol of hope, a new beginning. Daniel squeezed his father's hand, his grip a quiet promise, and for a moment, Walter felt Eleanor's presence, her warmth wrapping around him like a hug, her smile a silent approval. So remember, Walter concluded, his words echoing with quiet power, his voice a beacon of hope. You never know whose life you might change with one simple act of kindness. It might even be your own. The Tommy Grayson Veteran Support Center would go on to help thousands in the years that followed, a living testament to how one small gesture could spark a movement that changed countless lives. All because of an old man's last $15, a single act that rippled across the nation, touching hearts and inspiring change. What's the kindest thing you've ever done or had done for you? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how kindness has touched your life. Your story might inspire someone else to act, to create their own ripple of change. This story of sacrifice and redemption is just one of many on Daily Narrated Stories, where we bring you life-changing tales that uplift and inspire, stories that remind us of the best in humanity. If Walter's journey moved you, don't miss out on more stories like this. Subscribe to Daily Narrated Stories right now. Don't wait, because every day you're missing out on stories that can change the way you see the world. Hit that like button if you believe kindness always comes back in incredible ways. Comment honor if you think veterans deserve our support every single day. And share this video to spread this message of hope to someone who needs it. Time's ticking. Join our community of compassionate viewers today, and let's make the world a better place, one story at a time.